So, one of the first questions that I often get asked is what exactly is going on with all that Old Testament stuff? Certainly a question I had. And the answer might have a lot more to do with this guy, or whoever was masquerading as this guy, than you think. Stick around to find out. One of the most common refrains that I tend to hear is that all of the Old Testament points to Jesus. And what people mean by that is that things in the Old Testament were intentionally put there to foreshadow what was coming in the New Testament. This is what's known as the Christocentric hermeneutic, that everything in the scripture in some way, shape, or form points to Jesus, commonly found in a few quotations from the Gospel of John and in the book of Hebrews, where Hebrews sets up the sacrificial system in the Old Testament as a typology of what is to come. In practice, this means things like the Old Testament sacrifices representing the sacrifice that Jesus would give on Calvary, or, specific to our particular instance today, that the promises given in the Old Testament do not any longer apply to national Israel, but instead apply to the church. And the first ever individual to actually work this out is the person who wrote the Epistle of Barnabas around the 2nd century AD. Now, for those of you who don't know, Barnabas was a traveling companion of Paul in the book of Acts. This in particular letter, however, was probably not written by the historical Barnabas, but was instead authored pseudonymously. Now, what that means is that this work was not written by the author it claims to be, but intends to carry on the same thought process of the individual it's attempting to portray. In other words, the author of this letter thought that Barnabas would have been proud of the work that he just produced. What created the ideology of the Epistle of Barnabas is kind of a historical conundrum. You see, in the first century church, you had a majority Jewish population that was struggling as to whether or not to let in Gentiles, things like circumcision, things like should they hold the dietary laws. Now, the Apostle Paul came in and said that all of that was done away with at the cross, or at least these outward signs. Now, by the time you get to the 2nd century and a little bit before, you have an overwhelmingly majority Gentile population in the church. And now the reverse question is asked. Instead of should we allow Gentiles to live as Gentiles in the church, the question is should we let Jews express their Jewishness in the church? And this is where you get a little bit of anti Semitism seeping into the Christian church for perhaps the first time, where the tendency to read the Old Testament metaphorically was being fueled by this idea that the Jewish people couldn't handle their own scriptures themselves. This metaphorical reading of the scripture that the Epistle of Barnabas first sort of pioneered would be taken too much to heart for the New Testament church throughout the centuries. It could be argued that the first remnants of what could be called the Alexandrian school of interpretation, which is represented by people such as Athanasius of Alexandria or Clement of Alexandria, actually all spawns from this first Epistle of Barnabas, which is drawing upon already established Christian tradition of how to read the Old Testament. And it can still be felt in the church today. If you've ever heard a pastor argue for a primary typological interpretation of the Old Testament, or if you've heard someone say that the battle of David and Goliath is a metaphor for our conquering our own demons, then congratulations, you have the Epistle of Barnabas to thank for that. That'll be all for our first brief snippet on the Epistle of Barnabas. Up next, we'll be taking a look at a relatively modern figure, Julius Wellhausen. And next, we're going to take a look at a modern scholar, probably Mark Smith, but I haven't decided yet. Stay tuned.